All right, let's move on to the next chapter. When I finish this, I'm going to upload y'all's exam. So again, we'll make it due Saturday. This coming Saturday, the what's the date? The 21st at 11:59 p.m. So make sure you get it to me Saturday before midnight. And again, you can just upload it directly to Canvas. Let's see, what else? Then we have your second exam and then the final. Wow, that's going to really be pushing it. Next week is Thanksgiving, so I should be pretty free most of that week. And I will upload, there's only 4 chapters in this next section. I will try my best to get all 4 of those updated next week. So your second exam will probably be sometime around the 30th or the 1st of December. And then finals week is, I think it starts maybe the next week on the 7th, something like that. So we've got about 3 weeks until the end of the semester. So yeah, I will keep working on these videos, getting them uploaded. Hopefully everything will go by without a hitch, and we will be able to cover most of the content, especially through childhood at least, which is where a lot of the important stuff happens. This being a short semester really just kind of threw everything off, and with COVID and everything, and the rising number of cases, et cetera, it's just kind of made this semester really, really wonky. That being said, let's go ahead and get started here. All right, social and personality development in infancy. Socio-emotional development. Socio-emotional development involves changes in an individual's relationships with other people, changes in emotions, and changes in personality. Basically, how you relate to other people, how other people are going to relate to you. These are very, very, what's the word for it? Very, very characteristic of the child's personality. And personality tends to be almost a very static thing. You tend to kind of stay the same person pretty much throughout the course of your life. Very few people actually fundamentally change. So really, we kind of look at, it's called temperament, and we'll talk about temperament here a little bit later in this chapter. But temperament's kind of like almost a little infant proto-personality, if you will. And the different types of responding and the different types of attachment and all of these things we're going to look at in this chapter, those tend to be a very static, non-dynamic way of responding and representing yourself to the world. Again, temperament tends to turn into personality, and the type of child that you are tends to turn into the type of adult that you are. So, if you're kind of this whiny, clingy, needy type of child, and that's probably pretty much a pretty good representative example of how you're going to turn out as an adult. Your socio-emotional development tends to be how you represent yourself to the world, how you interact with other people, the types of people that you are friends with, the types of people that you like, the types of people that you do not like, the types of people that you find attractive, members of the opposite or the same sex. We're going to talk about gender development in this chapter. That gender development tends to be a very, very fundamental, very, very early onset kind of fork in the road that we take early on in our development that tends to kind of flavor and influence many, many other developmental aspects that we use. So a lot of these things are going to be very, very integral and very, very fundamental to our place in the world and how we represent ourselves to the world, how we respond, things like that. So socio-emotional development tends to be a very, very important topic. And if you take any other kinds of psychology classes, especially something like social psychology or perhaps another developmental class, this will come up again and again and again. It's very, very important, very, very, again, kind of almost a self-defining avenue. And we kind of learn to internalize certain things from our environment, again, that's going to help shape not only how we see the world, but also how the world sees us. All right, Erikson. You can think of Erikson as kind of a cooler or a cooler Piaget, if you will. Erikson has different stages of development. We're only going to talk about the first four. One, two, well, actually only the first two. Others will come up later on in adulthood if we have time to get to those. But unlike Piaget, Erikson's stages tend to, we continue to go through stages throughout the entire course of our lives. His stages tend to be like dichotomous sets of conflict. Like almost kind of this set of challenges that we are each presented with at different courses of our life. This is going to make a little bit more sense here when we actually start to kind of get down into it and talk about them. But Piaget's stages tend to focus on how the individual sees the world and how they solve problems and things like that, whereas Erikson's tend to be more choices, like you're either going to do this way or you're going to do that way. And depending on the way that the decision that you make, the choice that you make, it's not really a choice. But again, this will make a little bit more sense. Depending on which avenue, which way the path you go, that's going to kind of determine where you are in this stage and how that's going to affect the later stages as you progress. So Erikson tends to be a lot more relatable, I think, than Piaget. Piaget's a little more abstract and theoretical, but Erikson really kind of makes a lot more sense on a fundamental, kind of almost intuitive level. The series of stages present, the sets of challenges that we each face, and you're gonna, at one point, you're gonna come across this kind of mile marker in your development, and you're gonna either take the left-hand path or you're gonna take the right-hand path, and depending on which path you choose, that's gonna kind of present different challenges and things like that. So he almost kind of presents it as this sort of theoretical framework whereby the person is more in control of where they are and how they develop and how they progress. So Erikson, I prefer Erikson much more than Piaget. But again, these two guys are the fundamental powerhouses of developmental theory. There's all kinds of others, Skinner and things like that. But Piaget and Erikson, when you start thinking about like developmental stages, developmental markers, delineating different types of developmental milestones and progressions, Piaget and Erikson are the man. So let's go ahead and get to the first kind of milestone that Erikson sets up. The first one is trust versus mistrust. Again, so you're going to either choose to trust those people in your environment, or you're going to choose to mistrust people in your environment. There's several things that are going to kind of go into what makes a person decide to become a little more trusting, or what makes a person kind of have this attitude that people are only out for themselves, and everyone only wants something from you. And we all know people like this, and it has to do with whether or not your needs are met early on in life. Trust versus mistrust, Erikson's first stage. This occurs usually around the first year and a half or so of life. Most of us, pretty much come to grips with how the world is, whether the world is kind of this safe, nurturing, wholesome place where you feel safe and secure, or whether the world is a place to be fearful of, and you have to take care of yourself, and really the only person you have to depend on is yourself. And if you don't do it for yourself, then no one else will do it for you. And you kind of pull yourself up by the bootstraps, and you want something, go out and get it. The world's not going to hand you anything. So again, there's no really right or wrong answer. It's just kind of a different way of looking at the world. Trust is built when your basic needs are met. So if you have a loving, nurturing caretaker or household, then you're going to learn that your survival, your base survival is going to be okay. The world is safe, and no matter what happens, you're going to be okay in the long run. And so these people tend to be very, very high achievers, because again, they can if you go to things like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the triangle, they can divert a lot more resources to self-actualization and the ability to kind of expand their horizons and things like that, because they don't have to focus so much on the base, just raw survival. If your needs are not met during this time, then mistrust results, and you kind of take on this attitude that you have to scrape by for everything, and you're not as open, and you don't share as well, and you kind of keep everything to yourself because you don't know where your next meal is going to come from, or whatever. And that's an extreme case, but this idea that you have to take care of yourself, and the only person again you have to depend on is yourself, and nobody's going to do it for you. And so these people tend to kind of grow up and be very I don't want to say stingy, but they tend to be very, very kind of miserly. These people tend to do pretty well financially, actually. They tend to not really trust a whole lot of people very much, because again, they don't want to run the risk of if they do something for someone else, then if that person takes advantage of them, then that's fewer things that they have for their own survival, and they have nothing else to kind of fall back on, and so they're constantly in this state of agitation, and they're always in this survival mode. They tend to be very, very tough, very, very driven. They tend to be very, very success oriented, and tend to be again kind of a pull yourself out by the bootstraps, and if I'm going to make it, I've got to make it on my own, and those types of things. And we know people on both sides of this coin, and again, there's not one that's really better than the other, but they're just again kind of different ways of looking at the world. Trust manifests in a lifelong expectation that the world will be a good and pleasant place to live. Success at this stage garners hope, which is an openness to new experience tempered by wariness and discomfort or danger may arise. So this kind of ideal that if the basics are taken care of, then again we have much more energy and cognitive resources to kind of develop and pursue the higher interests of life. Again, these people tend to be dreamers and big thinkers and things like that, because again they have the ability. They don't have to worry about taking care of themselves and surviving. So they tend to be a little bit more lax and a little bit more easygoing, because they've learned that no matter what happens, everything will turn out okay in the end. Erickson's second stage, autonomy versus shame and doubt. This happens about 1.5 to 3 years of age. During this stage, children start asserting autonomy and will, and their independence starts to come through. This is kind of where the terrible twos and terrible threes come in. They start to begin to assert themselves, and they start to say no, and this is mine, and things like that. So they tend to kind of put themselves out there and put themselves on the line. And if that is accepted and that is garnished, then they tend to become very self-confident, very self-sufficient types of people. However, if they are in an environment where that is discouraged, where they are not allowed to kind of express their opinions, and they're not allowed to be individuals, like, say, someplace like China or Japan, where these kind of more collectivistic cultures, then they tend to kind of, that almost tends to kind of become a source of shame or a source of doubt, where they're not supposed to express themselves. They're supposed to fall in line, and they're supposed to be, based on the family, or they're supposed to be, the collective, the group is much more important than the individual. So this also has kind of a cultural spin on it as well. People in Western, more individualistic types of cultures tend to have this autonomous view where they are able to express themselves, and they're very self-confident, and with this idea that I'm going to do what I want, and go for it no matter what anyone else says. Those types of attitudes are much more kind of in this self-reliant, self-autonomous types of outlook. And in more Asian cultures and things like that tend to be a little more collectivistic, where the group is what's important than kind of showing this self-assertion or assertiveness, or this self-idealistic, go for it, I am who I am, and do what you want, and to hell with everyone else. That's not going to cut it there. And so they tend to kind of cast a lot of shame on those people who only look out for themselves, and who go out for individual self-gratification at all costs. Autonomy is counteracted by doubt that the child can handle demanding situations on his or her own, and the shame that can result from failure. So this can also be, where if helicopter parents and mommy, taking care of everything and shielding the child from any kind of danger or any kind of mishap that might happen. This tends to kind of build in the child this idea that they're not able to take care of themselves. And so they, if they run into problems, then they're going to immediately run to mommy, and mommy's going to fix them for him. That's not a very good or healthy way to raise your child, because you are kind of instilling in them that they're not strong enough, they're not able to deal with problems on their own, even though the mother's or the caretaker's intentions are good, wanting to protect the child and wanting to make the child safe and keep them, shield them from all kinds of harm or embarrassment or whatever. That tends to build very, very weak-willed and not very assertive or self-assured types of adults. Success at this stage gives rise to will and the knowledge that within limits, children can act on their world intentionally. That, again, my intentions are going to make some form of difference. And, it doesn't matter really, the outcome is not really important. It's the idea that you take the initiative to go get it yourself. And you can kind of see how this is really more of a distillation, or more of a kind of an advancement of the first stage, where they learn that they have to really kind of depend on themselves. And children who really learn that their basic needs are not going to get met, they are much more likely to kind of shield themselves behind mommy and not really have the self-confidence or the self-will or the self-assertiveness to go out there and try it themselves, because everything has always been taken care of for them. Whereas those people who have to really kind of depend on themselves, and they're constantly having to fix their own problems and solve their own problems and make sure that they are taken care of, then those people tend to be a lot more street smart and a lot more self-reliant, and they're going to take that with them. All right, so those are the first two of Erickson's stages. I think he has 7 or 8. We will get to those in the next section as we kind of start talking about the older children and adolescents. So Erickson will come up again, and we will continue on from there. All right, attachment and temperament. Attachment refers to the close emotional bond and enduring socio-emotional relationship between an infant and its caregiver. There are 4 types of attachment: secure, avoidant, resistant or ambivalent, and disorganized. One common method for discerning the type of attachment is through something called a strange situation, whereby the mother and infant enter an unfamiliar room filled with interesting toys. So, Mary Ainsworth developed this kind of test, if you will, for children to kind of determine the type of attachment that the child has. And again, when we start talking about these different types of attachment, keep in mind that it is the child that is attached to the caregiver, not the caregiver that is attached to the child. This is not personality, this is not temperament, this is not rearing or the type of parenting. This is how the child responds to the parent. So again, it is the child that is attached to the caregiver. So the strange situation, basically the gist is, child is there with his mother or his caregiver. Usually it's the mother. So we'll just assume that it's mama for now. They are brought into this room that the child has never been in before, and there's all kinds of awesome looking toys in the middle of the room. So child and mama sit down and they start playing with these toys, and the child's just having the time of his life. All of a sudden, mother stands up and walks out the room. Baby is, of course, visibly upset. His mom is gone, and what's going to happen? What's going on? And then this stranger, someone that the child has never met, comes in, tries to soothe the child, tries to comfort the child. Most children want absolutely nothing to do with it. Tries to even start playing with the child a little bit, and the child wants none of that. He wants mama. So the stranger gets up and leaves, and then mama comes back. Now, how the child treats mama when she comes back after essentially abandoning the child, if you will, and sent in some stranger that the child never seen or heard of, how the child responds, how the child treats mama when she comes back is a very good indicator of the type of attachment that child exhibits towards that caregiver. The first type, secure attachment. Hang on just a second. Secure attachment defines a relationship in which infants have come to trust and depend on their mothers. Trust, there's that word again. This comes straight from Erickson. Log back here, sorry. The baby may or may not cry when the mother leaves, but when she returns, the baby wants to be with her, and if the baby is crying, it stops. Secure attachment. Trust versus mistrust. These children are firmly within the trust category. Their needs are consistently met. They don't have to worry about taking care of themselves. They know that mama has always been there for them, and just because mama is gone now, they may not like that, but when mama comes back, it's back to business as usual. Everything turns out okay, because mama has never abandoned me before. Mama has never stayed gone, and all of my needs are met, and so I'm going to take that and just kind of I may not like being separated from mom, but now that she's back, everything is okay again. It's like the child is saying, I missed you terribly. I'm delighted to see you, but now that all is well, I'll get back to what I was doing. So the child, tends to respond very, very favorably. They tend to they tend to kind of react much more favorably towards the mother when she returns. They tend to kind of snap back from their distress of being left by mama. Many developmental psychologists believe that a strong attachment to the caregiver during the first year of life provides an important foundation for later development. And this again sounds a lot like the early experience doctrine that we talked about last time, where again this strong, nurturing, loving, caregiving, if it happens early on, then that foundation is going to be built, and everything else developmental wise is going to kind of be built on top of that strong, firm foundation of trust and willingness and openness, etc., etc., etc. The second type, avoidant attachment, refers to a relationship in which the infant turns away from its mother when they are reunited following a brief separation. Baby is not upset when the mother leaves, and when she returns may ignore her by looking or turning away. You left me again. I always have to take care of myself. So these children tend to almost be kind of in the mistrust category of Erickson stages, where they have to kind of depend on themselves, and they can't really place a lot of trust in the mother, because maybe she leaves often, or maybe that's just the type of person that the child is. They tend to be more loners and more introverts, and more just kind of leave me alone. I want to do my own thing, and I can take care of myself, and I'm perfectly happy. I'm perfectly fine being alone. It's not the end of the world, and c'est la vie. Such is life. The third type, resistant, ambivalent attachment, refers to a relationship in which, after a brief separation, infants want to be held but are difficult to console. The baby is upset when the mother leaves, and it remains upset or even angry when she returns. Baby says, "Why do you do this? I need you desperately, and yet you just leave me without warning. I get so angry when you're like this." And these types of babies tend to be very clingy, very needy. These are the children with severe separation anxiety. They can't imagine functioning without mama. These are, again, if we go back to Erickson stages, the autonomy versus shame and doubt, these children tend to not be very autonomous, and they also tend to be mistrusting, because again, these children who, if you kind of mix mistrust with shame and doubt, they are not able to depend on their caregivers, and yet they don't have the self-confidence to kind of take care or soothe themselves, and so they freak out when they're separated from mama, because mama takes care of everything, and they're not able to really rely on themselves, and they don't have the tools or the equipment to do that, but yet they also don't have the realization or the self-confidence to know that they are going to be okay or taken care of when mama is not there. So this is kind of the worst of both worlds, if you will. That's why these types of children freak out and really go over melodramatic when they're separated, and they're when mama comes back, they try to console them and comfort them, but the child it just continues to bawl, and because again they have no equipment, they have no ability to really kind of rely on themselves and take care of things for themselves, but yet they can't really rely on or trust that mama's going to do it either. So that it's very, very traumatic when they are separated or disjointed from their caregivers. And finally, the final kind, disorganized or disoriented attachment, refers to a relationship in which infants don't seem to understand what's happening when they are separated and later reunited with their mothers. Baby seems confused when the mother leaves, and when she returns, as if not really understanding exactly what's going on. It's like the child is saying, "What's happening? I want you to be here, but you left, and now you're back. I don't really understand or get what's going on." And this tends to be really the least common. It doesn't occur a whole lot in especially American society. This tends to be it's more common in autistic children who become so consumed with playing with the toys that perhaps they may not even realize that mother has even left the room to begin with. And so they may look up and there's this strange person here that they, didn't even realize that mama had left, and that this stranger has come in, and then they start to freak out because they can't really put together where mama went and where this weird person came from, and then they start to panic and they start to freak out a little bit because they weren't really paying attention to what was going on because they were so consumed with the toys or with the task at hand. And so these children tend to develop that almost withdrawn, socially inept types of autistic or Aspergerish types of children who don't really have a social connection or don't really pay attention too much to the people around them, because the things in the environment are usually much more important than other people. Okay, on to temperament. Temperament involves an individual's behavioral style and characteristic way of responding. So this is basically kind of a baby or a proto-personality, kind of a personality in development, if you will. The types of responding that the child might have, the types of behavior that the child might have. And again, temperament tends to kind of blossom or develop into a full-blown personality later on. But all children, all infants, they have characteristic ways of responding, and we don't really call it a personality at this stage because it's not yet quite fully developed. But all children are different. We can pretty much categorize them within one of three different types. The first is the easy child, the difficult child, and then the slow to warm up child. The easy child is generally in a positive mood. They quickly establish regular routines in infancy, and they adapt easily to new experiences. The difficult child tends to react negatively and cry frequently. They engage in irregular daily routines, and they are slow to accept new experiences. And then the slow to warm up child has a low activity level. They are somewhat negative. They show low adaptability, and they display a low intensity of mood. So the easy child is kind of the gold standard. This is what you want if you choose to have children, or if you already have children. This is really the easy child to raise. They're the ones who are usually pretty happy-go-lucky. They don't tend to really demand a whole lot. They're pretty chill and easygoing. Whatever works for you works for me. They're not really picky in what they eat, or they like trying new things. They like doing new things. They're not they're just really malleable and really well behaved, really kind of chill kids. And then the difficult children is exactly what it sounds like. These are the children that nothing is ever really good enough. They never really want to do anything. They never want to change. They never want to adapt to do things. Any kind of change or alteration in their routine is devastating, and everything is the end of the world, and they never really are able to go with the flow, and everything is really difficult, and everything is a big huge production, and they don't want to go here and they don't want to go there, and these are children that throw fits all over the place because they don't get what they want, etc., etc., etc. And then we have the slow to warm up child. These children tend to be kind of somewhere in the middle, but they don't really go too high on either end. They tend to be more withdrawn. They tend to be more self-reliant, more of a loner. They tend to not really need much of anything on one way or the other. They're not really easygoing or outgoing or very sociable, but they're also not really clingy and crybaby-ish and difficult, where everything is really such a production, and it takes 15 things to make them happy, and those types of. So they're really I guess you can kind of think of them as being somewhat in between, but again, they're not really. They're really low adaptive, low activity level. Just they don't really care to do much of anything. So I kind of see them as kind of the children who are kind of slackers. They turn into people who don't really have much drive or much ambition. It's not that they don't really take much initiative on either side. It's not like they really want to do anything, but there's not really a whole lot that they really don't want to do either. So you can kind of think of the slow to warm up as kind of being in the middle, but a much flatter level of much less intense on either side. You can think of easy children and difficult children as being very, very intense on opposite sides of the spectrum, and then the slow to warm up children are really kind of more lower field in somewhere in the middle. Parenting. There are 4 types of parenting: authoritarian parenting, authoritative parenting, neglectful, and indulgent. And these are pretty much exactly what they sound like. Authoritarian parenting is a restrictive, punitive style in which the parent exhorts the child to follow the parent's directions and to value hard work and effort. They place very firm limits and control the child with minimal verbal exchange. You do it my way or else, no back talk. Very firm rules, very rules oriented. I kind of think of authoritarian parents as kind of like the military dad, where the children are expected to follow the rules at all costs. They don't really, I don't care why you did it or what you were thinking or what you were feeling. You have your rules, you have your chores, you know what to do, and I expect it to be done, etc., etc., etc. And there's very little give and take. There's very little really discussion. There's actually no discussion. They don't want to hear it. They don't want to hear why you did it or what happened. But this kind of children are meant to be seen and not heard. I don't want to hear your excuses, etc., etc., etc. This type of parenting is associated with children's social incompetence, failure to initiate activity, poor communication skills, and comparisons of themselves to others. This is not surprising. Any child who isn't afforded the opportunity to express themselves or express their opinions, they're taught that their opinions don't really matter, that they are supposed to follow the rules, and I don't really care anything beyond that. Not surprisingly, these children don't really express themselves much at all, because it's never really gotten them anywhere before. And so, they tend to be very well behaved, very high achievers. They tend to do very well in school, and have a great deal of drive to be successful, because that's really the only measure of what it means to be good. Excuse me. The second, authoritative parenting, encourages children to be independent, but still places limits and controls on their behavior. There's an extensive verbal give and take. These parents are very warm and nurturing. So this is kind of the gold standard. This is the ideal, if you will. There's still rules to follow. There's still limits on the child's behavior. They can't do what they want when they want and run amok. But it tends to be less punitive and less restrictive than the authoritarian. And there tends to be kind of a little more verbal give and take. The children usually know why they're being punished, and it's not so cut and dry. It's not so harsh. Excuse me. This type of parenting breeds socially competent, self-reliant, and socially responsible children. Again, the reasoning behind the behavior or the misbehavior, if you will, that is of course taken into account. And sometimes it's okay to break the rules. Sometimes it's okay to express yourself, and might even kind of stand up for yourself a little bit, and make sure that you're being punished appropriately, and make sure that there's a little bit more understanding on the part of the parent of maybe why the child did that. Whereas authoritarian parents don't care why. They just kind of the end result is everything, and whether they behave or whether they don't, it doesn't really matter why. So you can kind of see authoritarian is not very forgiving and not very adaptive, whereas authoritative is much more forgiving, much more I don't really want to say nourishing, but that's kind of how I picture it. These parents are very warm and loving and nurturing, and they tend to nourish the relationship with the child, and they tend to nourish the child's competence and self-reliance and things like that. The third is neglectful parenting. This is, again, exactly what it sounds like. This is a style in which the parents are uninvolved in their child's life. This breeds a sense that other aspects of the parents' lives are more important than the child. Children of these parents tend to be less competent socially. They tend to handle independence poorly, and they tend to show very poor self-control. They tend to kind of raise themselves, and so they don't really learn, any kind of clear boundaries because they don't really learn much of anything, and they tend to kind of rely on themselves a lot. So they don't get a whole lot of discipline, which again, tends to let them kind of do what they want because they're not really being parented, and they're not really shown the proper way to live in this society or live in the world, or how to properly behave, or what is acceptable in one situation or not another. They tend to just kind of be on their own to kind of look out for themselves. And finally, indulgent parenting. This is, again, exactly what it sounds like. This is a style in which parents are involved with their children but place very few limits on them. They pretty much let the child do what they want. These parents tend to be much more concerned with being the child's friend, or wanting to have the child like them. They don't want to punish the child because they don't want the child to be mad at them, or anything like that. They'd much rather be friends or equals with their child than be the disciplinarian and someone who teaches the child how to live a productive life. These children often rate poorly in social competence. They often fail to learn respect for others, and they expect to get their own way, and they have difficulty controlling their own behavior. They're essentially spoiled little brats who are used to kind of running the roost, and their parents never really discipline them or anything because, again, they don't want the child to get mad at them or whatever, and so they tend to give the children exactly what they want. And so these children grow up with this sense of entitlement that they are in charge, and there should be no reason why they can't get exactly what they want when they want it. And we all know people who are just exactly like this. People who are selfish or self-absorbed, or think that they don't really understand why they lost or anything, because they've always been allowed to win and pretty much name their own lot in life. And that's not really how the world works. So these parents, although they may be good friends and their children may like them, their children don't really respect them, and they're actually doing their children a disservice by not allowing their children to experience any form of hardship or loss, really. All right, gender development. Gender refers to the social and psychological aspects of being female or male. It includes not only biological sex, but also one's understanding of the meaning of gender in one's life. So your sex is not the same as your gender. Your sex is your biology, your chromosomal inheritance that you get from your parents. Do you have a penis? Do you have a vagina? That is your sex, male or female. Your gender is that your psychosocial aspect of your identity, that part of you that identifies as being either male or female. For the vast majority of people, these two tend to match up very nicely. The source, the part of your identity that is expressed as being either male or female, masculine or feminine, matches up perfectly with the physical anatomy that you have been assigned at birth. There are people who this is not always the case. Transsexuals, people with gender identity disorder, feel like they are trapped in a body of the wrong sex. They may have a penis, but they feel like they are a woman. And there's that fundamental aspect of their identity that they identify as a woman. And that part of you that makes you think that you are a man or a woman, we're not exactly sure where that comes from, or we know that it happens pretty early on, but we're again not very sure of what triggers that. There's kind of evidence on both sides of the camp where it tends to be a biological or physiological push or kick, might be hormonal, or it could be, some kind of environmental determinant, or it could be just some kind of subconscious free choice that each of us makes at some predetermined spot in our lives. We haven't really discovered the exact source of where this comes from. We just know that it happens at some point early on in our development. So sex is biology, gender is psychology, psychosocial aspect of your identity. Whether that's a choice or whether that's a conscious choice, we're not again really sure. All right, gender identity. What is it that makes you think you're a man or a woman? We just kind of talked about that. The essence of your masculinity or femininity is a deep-seated personal sense of self as a male or female. This is called your gender identity. Most of us have a pretty firm grip on, are you a man or a woman, a boy or a girl? Most of us you will answer one or the other. That is your gender identity, that part of you that identifies as being either one or the other. As children grow up, they adopt what are called gender social roles, which involve expectations for how females and males should think, act, and feel. So this is more of kind of a social or a communal aspect of that identity. What does it mean to be a man? What does it mean to be a woman? How should men behave in society? How should women behave? Different societies are going to have different social roles for each gender. A woman in, Japan, for instance, will act much different than a woman in Brazil or a woman in Afghanistan. So the social pressures that are placed on each of us to adopt to kind of these social roles, these social mores that each of our cultures and each of our societies say is acceptable, that tends to kind of influence how we express that part of our identity. Recent theories predict that children develop a gender schema. Ooh, there's that word again. Based on what is considered appropriate behavior for females and males in their culture. According to gender schema theory, children first decide if an object, activity, or behavior is associated with females or males. They then use this information to decide whether they should learn more about the object, activity, or behavior. So if I'm a 3-year-old boy, boys play with trucks and girls play with dolls. And since I am a boy, I will not play with dolls. I will choose to play with trucks. And kind of the opposite holds for girls. And as you grow older, you might start playing, cops and robbers or cowboys and Indians. Or if you're a boy, and you might start, again playing with dolls or your easy bake oven or something like that if you're a girl. This, of course, does not always hold the case. There are girls who go out and play with the boys, and there are boys who would rather learn how to cook or read or etc. like that. But again, for the most part, for the majority of developing children, they tend to stick with their own sex or gender. So boys will play with boys and girls will play with girls, and they choose their behaviors accordingly. Gender schemas have at their base a set of cultural guidelines as to how a person should behave, particularly with other people. This is called a social role. Along these lines, children develop gender stereotypes, which are beliefs and images about males and females that may or may not be true, such as boys are doctors and girls are nurses, or boys are pilots and girls are flight attendants, etc., etc., etc. These are, of course, especially in more modern times, these are not always the case. Excuse me. But these social rules of how men should treat men and how men should treat women, how women should treat other women and how women should treat men, these are again very culturally defined, and you're going to find acceptable and appropriate gender behavior based on the culture in which that behavior occurs, much like a lot of behaviors that we exhibit. courting behavior, for example. Um, that it takes a very different spin, a very different flavor in places like Japan, as they do in places like the United States, places like India, or Israel or something like that, where perhaps arranged marriages are common, and the bride and groom may not even meet each other prior to the wedding day. These types of kind of cultural norms that are expected of each member of each gender are pretty hardwired into society, and people tend to adapt to that, and they tend to either fit well within the social norm of whatever they are or whatever they choose to identify as, or they do not. Many of these gender stereotypes are false, of course. Not all boys are doctors and not all girls are nurses. But research has shown that there are bona fide differences between males and females. Aside from the anatomical differences, males are oftentimes larger and stronger than females. Boys are usually more active than girls, and girls have a lower mortality rate and are less susceptible to stress and disease. Further, research has shown differences between males and females in the following areas. Verbal ability, you girls, you ladies, cream us in that. Mathematics, as a general rule, boys tend to be more analytical. Social influence, girls. Spatial ability, boys. Emotional sensitivity, girls, yeah. And aggression, boys. In most other intellectual and social domains, boys and girls are pretty similar. But again, men and women, boys and girls, we are not the same. We are not designed to be the same. We are designed to be complementary. Where, one of us kind of shines, the other tends to come up, not as strong. So we tend to kind of fill in each other's gaps, if you will, which is a good way to put it. Full understanding of gender is said to develop gradually in 3 steps. The first is gender labeling, whereby children understand that they are either boys or girls and label themselves accordingly. I'm a boy, you're a girl, etc., 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 and they tend to kind of self-identify as one or the other. Gender stability, whereby children begin to understand that gender is stable. Boys grow up to become men, and girls grow up to become women. If you're a boy, you're going to be more like daddy. If you're a girl, you're going to be more like mama. Gender constancy, whereby most children understand that maleness and femaleness do not change over situations or according to personal wishes. Gender is constant. It is something that you can't flip-flop and switch based on the circumstances. What you are is what you are. So once you identify as one, then most of us stick with that for the rest of our lives. Gender identity disorder, also called transsexualism. We touched on this a little bit earlier. This is a psychological dissatisfaction with one's own biological sex. That should say sex instead of gender. See? A disturbance in the sense of one's identity as a male or a female. The primary goal here is not sexual arousal, but rather to live the life of the opposite gender. People with this disorder feel trapped in a body of the wrong sex. So their sex does not match up with their gender. What they feel like they are is not in congruence with the body that they have been given. So they feel, again, trapped in a body of the wrong sex. They may feel like they are a woman. They may, identify as a woman, but they are trapped in a male's body. And this has nothing to do with sexual preference. It's not having to do with homosexuality. This is a source of identity, and what they feel that they are and who that they feel that they are. And this is something that is integral and very, very very, very fundamental to their identity, because again, everything else every other source of development, every other source of your identity comes from your gender. This is a very, very clear, very, very early demarcation from each other. You either go on the right hand path or you go on the left hand path. Hopefully, these two things match up nicely, and you go on your merry way. But for some of us, the body that they've been assigned at birth does not match who they feel that they are on a fundamental at a fundamental base level. So they're it's not that they're confused, it's not that they're gay or anything like that, but it's a identity issue. They don't feel like they are in the right body. It's a very, very stressful and very, very confusing. I don't really want to say disorder, but that's how it's labeled. Gender identity disorder. They're not able. It doesn't match up cleanly, and so they're not really sure exactly what to feel or what to think about themselves, and they start to question who they are and what they are. So again, that has absolutely nothing to do with sexual arousal. This is not transvestic fetishism or anything like that, but it's a kind of a mismatch of their sense of identity and their sense of who they are fundamentally. All right, that is the 5th chapter. So I will go ahead and post these up, and then I will post your first exam. So again, make sure that you get that to me by Saturday at 11:59. I will write all of this down in the announcement when I post the exam itself. Again, if you have any questions, let me know. Shoot me an email. But you can turn your exam in anytime prior to that. You can turn it in early if you choose, or do with it what you see. But I need it by Saturday at 11:59 p.m. So if I wake up Sunday and I don't have your exam, it is too late. All right. So if you have any questions, shoot me an email. Let me know. We kind of breezed through this last chapter. I wanted to get it up and out of the way so that you guys could get started on your exam. I will go ahead and post the notes for the next set of chapters, and I will work on getting those videos up as soon as possible. All right, that's it. So if you have any questions, let me know, and I will see you later.